I work for the Scottish Historic Buildings Trust, and they contacted us. We have been doing a bit of work on Doocots recently. Hi there. We've put together a bit of a campaign to try and kind of raise a bit more awareness and get people talking about Doocots, because they quite often are forgotten about. So I am just going to run through a bit of history about the Doocots, kind of tell you a wee bit about them, and what they're used for, kind of where they originated from, just a bit of background info so you're a bit more familiar with Doocots. So I will just script back there. So this is roughly what we're going to cover. So a wee introduction to Doocots, some insights on their significance. I'll mention some that we have in our care, some that are recently restored, some at risk, and then I'll pass over to Richard and he will talk about Glenbarr specifically. On a very basic level, what is a Doocot? So Doocot is the Scots term for dovecote, which housed doves and rock pigeons as we know them now. We would just call them common pigeons. The rock dove was the pure form of the common pigeon. So that is where the name dovecote comes from. Its origins can be traced back as far as ancient Egypt and Rome. These were very basic forms of Doocot. So the Egyptians would have large towers, they would have branches and kind of broken glass jars that the pigeons would fly into and nest in. The Romans quite often had towers on their rooftops that the pigeons would nest in. Again, very basic forms, but the idea was there that there was a home for the pigeons to nest in. The Romans took the keeping of pigeons very seriously. They wrote a lot of books on best practices for keeping pigeons, and they stated there were 5 main requirements for the keeping of pigeons in man-made shelters. So these 5 were shelter, ventilation, ease of access, protection from vermin, and the provision of nesting facilities. And even though these were very basic forms, these would be the 5 most important elements going forward in all Doocots from then until now. So the origins, as we say, can go back as far as there, but as for when they come to Scotland, we definitely start to see them by the 13th century. It's possible the Romans might have brought the idea with them when they were here, but it's more likely it came with the Normans in the 12th and 13th centuries. So in the 13th century, we see them start to emerge, but by the 18th century, they've become a standard feature of Scottish landed estates. So there are some very early references to Doocots in Orkney, some Pictish dwelling houses, some caves that have been converted. There's also a very early mention of Robert the Bruce's library at Hawthornden, where there were nesting boxes converted into the wall of a cavern. That's quite a common practice. These weren't necessarily purpose-built structures. They were caves or other structures that were kind of repurposed to house doves and pigeons. The oldest surviving purpose-built Doocot, we think, is the one built into the walls of Argyll Abbey, just the one on the right here. And the oldest dated Doocot is at Merton House, which states on the stone that it's 1376. It is possible that this was reused from an earlier structure, but this is the oldest surviving dated Doocot that we know of. So, what do they look like? So generally speaking, there are 2 main styles of Doocot that you'll see, and that is beehive and lectern. So the beehive Doocot is the earlier of the 2, so named because of its shape. These are the first purpose-built Doocots of the form, and Fordun, writing before 1385, mentions these. He describes a Roman structure at Arthur's Oven in Stenhousemuir as a small round chamber like a pigeon house. It's thought that this shape might have emerged from the reuse of castle turrets and defences and using these to house pigeons. These are obviously, as you can see, usually quite large structures, narrowing at the top with flat domed roofs. Quite often in the later varieties of these beehive Doocots, you'll see that they have central revolving ladders to access the pigeon nests. This is called a potence ladder, and we'll see an example of this a little bit later on when we look at some more examples of Doocots. So that is the first type of Doocot. The second type is called the lectern Doocot. Its most distinctive element is this sloping roof, which you'll see. Now these are most common in Scotland, and they were much more efficient. They could be separated into 2 or sometimes 4 chambers with the birds, and they would be lined with nesting boxes from the ceiling right down to the ground. These were also more sophisticated, so they allowed for some more decoration. They're more interesting to look at. You'll see the incorporation of marriage stones and heraldic panels in later designs. And the earliest surviving lectern Doocot that we know of in Scotland is at Tantallon Castle, just this one up the top, and this is a 17th century Doocot. The largest lectern Doocot that we know of in terms of nesting boxes is at Binavon Castle, and this has 2,241 nesting boxes. So nesting boxes, Doocot, continues to be built well into the 18th century, and some other styles will emerge that kind of don't fall into the category of beehive or lectern. The styles could range from baronial to classical, but often if they were associated with the house, then they would reflect the style of the house. And quite often they were even built synonymously or with the same materials as said house. There was an increasing interest in the 18th century of the landscape. People were much more aware of their surroundings. Architects would be employed to map out landscapes, so they would be more interested in where the Doocots were and how they would be perceived to others. There's also some revival in the 19th century of Gothic taste, so this is quite often seen in the Doocots of this time. So why were the Doocots so popular and how did they function? So pigeons were a very valuable asset during these times. They provided a much needed source of fresh meat throughout the winter, and if the Doocots were well looked after, they could provide a supply for 10 months of the year. The pigeons were relatively simple to catch once they came into the nest, and they were also pretty easy to prepare as well for the estate. Various concoctions were used to try and tempt the doos into the nest. These involved old wine and myrrh and grain. The flight holes of the Doocot would be small enough to let pigeons in, but not so big as to let any other larger prey in that would cause issues for pigeons. This is also why usually the nesting boxes are slightly elevated off the floor so that no vermin could get in that would be causing troubles for the pigeons. On vermin control as well, you'll see in most Doocots that there is a line of projecting stones, kind of 2/3 up the way the Doocot. This was to prevent rats from crawling up and getting inside the Doocot into the nesting boxes. In England, we are told that they took this a step further and that sometimes for Doocots they would have metal spikes at the end of the Doocot, so when the rats were thrown off the Doocot, they would be impaled on these spikes, which is not very nice, but I'm told that was only in England. So this is just a wee illustration of the common pigeon as we know it, but as I say, the purest form is the rock dove. So they took very little looking after, they cared for themselves, they found their own water, they found their own food, so it didn't take much for a laird to be looking after the pigeons. They are most prolific, therefore, in areas with lots of good arable land for them to feed off. This is why you'll see lots of Doocots in places like Fife, which is actually called the Doocot capital of Scotland, and the Lothians. So in the early winter, the older birds would be eaten first as a source of food. The young birds, which were known as squabs or peasers, were considered a great delicacy, so they were savoured. And squab pie was a national dish in Scotland for many years. Not only, however, were the pigeons used for their meat and eggs, but their droppings also had various uses. So they could be used for fertiliser, they were also used in the processes of leather, tanning and cloth dyeing, and they could even use their droppings in the production of gunpowder. They found that they were very high in potassium nitrate, so when they mixed these with sulphur and black earth, it made a form of gunpowder. So this was very valuable, obviously, in times of war. For example, in a siege, the pigeons could feed the estate, they could provide ammunition, and trained pigeons could even carry messages. Pigeons were also believed to have some medicinal properties, so they were used in a lot of cures, from baldness to the plague, to fevers, and some other ones, which I'm sure I can't remember. So yeah, it's obvious why they were so popular. They had a lot of uses. They were very useful to people on the estate. So at the height of their popularity, they did enjoy some element of protection. In the early 15th century, they were considered the right of all baronies, monasteries, castles, and abbeys. And in 1503, James IV directed all of his layers to construct Doocotts for the benefit of the community. This is why at this time we see an influx of Doocotts being created, as they've been instructed to do so. So much so that by 1617 they have to limit the building of Doocotts, and they do this by limiting it by statute to layers who are producing a certain amount per land. There's no limit on how big this can be or where it is, but there's only one allowed for each laird. This legislation is again later relaxed, and from the beginning of the 18th century, the number of estates claiming right to Doocot again increases. The protection of Doocotts was taken very seriously. There was a number of laws in place to protect them, and it was a crime to damage a Doocot or steal any of its pigeons. By 1567, shooting at a lair's pigeons was punishable by 40 days in prison. A second offence, you could lose your right hand. And a third offence and refusal to pay a fine could even result in the offender being hung. So they were very serious about their Doocotts and their pigeons. And there was various societies for the protection of pigeons and land owners' rights. An example of this is the Affiliation for Preserving Pigeons. This operated in the Falkirk area in the early 19th century, and they sought for the prosecution of anyone found to be taking birds from Doocotts without permission. With the 19th century came agricultural advancements, which essentially rendered Doocotts obsolete in the practical sense. There was advances in farming, there was new crops, mainly the turnip from Sweden, and this meant that livestock could be kept through the winter, and people were no longer as dependent on pigeons through the winter to feed them. In fact, they were starting to become a bit of a nuisance. They had bred and bred, and what was once a bonus that they fed themselves off the land was now a major issue. In 1796, the pigeons had eaten enough grain for 3,000 people in Midlothian, and in Fife, roughly 300 private pigeon houses accommodated a breeding population of about 36,000 pairs of birds. These concerns over the food eaten were obviously heightened ever more in times of wartime restriction, such as the Napoleonic Wars from 1790 to 1810. However, even when they were no longer practical, the Doocotts did still continue to be built. Now they were more for decorative reasons. They were seen as status symbols for the landed gentry who liked to show their right to own the pigeon house, even though they didn't need it. So for this reason, you'll see the designs become a bit more ostentatious and flamboyant. That is to say that they are no longer for practical reasons, so they are for show and for showing power and for showing wealth. So that the small scale and kind of flexibility of Doocotts quite often allowed architects to use them as kind of small projects that they could then work up bigger. But by the middle of the 19th century, even as status symbols or experiments, they were again decreasing in popularity, and architects were looking towards other buildings. So ultimately, each Doocot can tell us a story of its time and place, giving us an insight into former ways of life, and this obviously can only add to our richness of heritage and history. Doocotts were built by local people using local materials and forms of construction and skills, and many Doocotts only survive today due to the high level of craftsmanship that was involved in their construction. In many cases, they're the only remaining reminder of great estates, the rest of which has been long lost to history. Even with the fall in their popularity, there was no record of any large-scale demolition of Doocotts or any wholesale pigeon killing. It would be fairly simple to disable a Doocot. You would plug the pigeonholes, frighten the pigeons away, they essentially couldn't come back, and the Doocot would now be out of use. Some were repurposed for other uses, such as summer houses, wine cellars, potting sheds, granaries. So perhaps they weren't demolished because it wasn't necessary, but there also was an old belief that if you destroyed a Doocot, it would result in a death within the year of the family of the person responsible. So many people maybe just didn't want to risk it, even if they weren't sure. So for that case, or for the cases above, many are simply abandoned. So for that reason, there are a lot of Doocots that are currently at risk. Some people have found it difficult to find a new use for it. They have small floor plans, no windows, low doorways, walls covered in nests and boxes, and some even have central revolving ladders to contend with. Finding a future use for these and funding will of course be the critical deciding factors of whether these Doocots survive or not. B and C listed Doocots are at the highest risks. A list Doocots are usually important enough, they garner attention, they're not forgotten about. There are currently 94 Doocots in Scotland on the building's at-risk register. This register has been paused, so there may be more that we don't know about. So I will just give a few examples of the kind of Doocots that are on the register. This is Collinswell Doocot in Fife, I believe. This is a C-listed Doocot, and it stood on lands on Burnt Island for more than 200 years. Recently, it's been at the heart of some planning applications. They want to redevelop the lands around it for new houses. Historic Environment Scotland and members of the local trust have fought against this to try and rescue it. And despite numerous applications, it does still stand. However, the land around it has been redeveloped, so for how much longer is not known. This is Glasshaw House Doocot. This is one of the few examples, like Glenbarr, where the Doocot and the house still survive, although both are at risk of being lost. The house is at immediate risk of the roof collapsing, as is the Doocot, and they are both in the hands of private owners, who local planners are said to have contacted, but again, the future for it does look very uncertain. Such is the case for Darleaf House. This is an A-listed Doocot, and it's understood to be in very poor condition. The Building at Risk Register was contacted in 2021 by private owners who said they intend to pursue a long-term restoration of the building themselves, and some stabilisation work is understood to have been taken out. So perhaps there is some hope here. And lastly is Bannockburn House Doocot, which we believe dates from 1698. Now, the community banded together to take on the associated Bannockburn House, but as of yet, nothing has been done with the Doocot. So we hope that obviously this can be next on the list. But these are just some more Doocots. You can see in various states of disrepair, trees growing out of them, taken over by the lands. But onto a nicer part is some recently restored Doocots. So this is Kingsbarn Distillery, and this was a major renovation of a B-listed 19th century farmsteading and Doocot tower. The project involved the construction of a new steel structure which now homes a 600,000 litre malt whisky distillery. There is a visitor centre with the redeveloped settings, and the Doocot is also incorporated into the operation. It now provides a home to their whisky bottles, and they have even named one of their whiskies after the Doocot, and such is here. You can even, it's not a very clear picture, but it is actually shaped like your Doocot is too. This is Crail's Priory Doocot, which is an A-listed structure from the 16th century. It appears to have been empty since at least the mid-19th century and was gifted in 1960 to the Crail Preservation Society. At the time, they carried out some minor repairs, but which was found later it actually had caused more damage. They had applied harlan to the outside, which was non-porous, which in turn elevated the damp problem inside. So while it may have looked in good condition from the outside, it was a very different inside. The nests and boxes were essentially collapsing and soaking. But more recently, the CPS have undertaken major fundraising efforts, and by the end of 2017, they had sufficient funds, so they carried out a full restoration of the Doocot. This is now open to the public and has been since 2019. They have kept a really good online journal of their progress. They had a lot of help from the local community. They had some volunteers down to do a dig. They had children from the local school across. They even documented, this is the Polton's ladder that we mentioned earlier. Trying to get a 7-foot long ladder up a hill was not very easy, but they all banded together, and this is the finished project here. Another example of a recently restored one is Athol Stanford Doocot. This is one of the earliest surviving Scottish lectern style Doocots, and it was built in 1583 by George Hepburn. It was restored in 1996, and it now provides a home to the Flag Heritage Centre. Visitors can enjoy an AV dramatisation of a 9th century battle within the Doocot. This is thought to be the origins of the saltire as we know it now, where it was first seen. This is part of a wider heritage site, so there is also a viewing point of the battle site, an interpretive panel, and there is also a church and a graveyard on site too. And the last example here is Boar Hills Doocot. This is a fine example of a 17th century lectern style Doocot, but had been left in very bad condition. In 2018, Boar Hills and Dunino Community Trust acquired an area of land and the dilapidated Doocot. Their objective was to incorporate it into a green space project to provide a place for people to enjoy. So this would involve landscaping, planting trees, making a picnic area and such. They were very successful in this. They raised the funds, and this was completed in 2023. It's now a wonderful landmark. You see on the bottom here the finished piece. It's now a great walking route for people to enjoy in the community and people coming from afar as well. So at Strathleven House, this is where I work, and this is owned by SBHT. This was the first project that we took on. You'll see just a couple of pictures here of the progress. This house lay empty for years. It was repurchased for development. The area around it became an industrial estate. While the house was ignored, it was at risk of being demolished, essentially. SBHT took it on in the 80s, and following a large project, it reopened in 2000 and is now a fully functioning business centre, as it has been since 2000. Now, the Doocot at Strathleven House was made safe at restoration. There were some problems with the roof, and this was fixed. Sadly, since then, nothing else has been done with it, but we are currently looking at options for this on the back of our campaign to raise some awareness on Doocots. And as part of our Doors Open Day last year, we hosted a Design a Doocot Day, where families came down and learned a wee bit about the history of Doocots, a bit about the history of Strathleven, and turned their hand at making their own Doocots. We also have another Doocot at Blackburn House, very similar to Strathleven, a similar story, lay unoccupied for years. SBHT take it over in 2005, and following fundraising and a project, it opened in 2009. It's now a business centre with photography and recording studios. The Doocot at Blackburn was restored. It has two Doocots, and this is the East Doocot, which is now an interpretation room. So it tells you about the history of Blackburn, a wee bit about the history of Doocots, and there are even some toy pigeons as well to keep you company. And that takes us on to Glenbarr Doocot. So as Linda mentioned, we were contacted on the back of our campaign, which was in the Herald, to come and assist with possible restoration of Glenbarr Doocot. So Glenbarr has suffered the fate of a lot of Doocots, sadly, and is on the Buildings at Risk Register as C listed and at high risk. SBHT are working in partnership with Richard Fraser of Limerich. Richard has wide-ranging expertise in the field of building conservation and a keen interest in Doocots, having been previously involved in restoring New Elgin Doocot. I'll now hand over to Richard, and he'll talk a wee bit more about Glenbarr specifically.
Yeah, I'm a traditional building restorer and contractor. Missed out on 3 of those projects. The Crail one, missed out on that one. The Athol Stainford one, I did a survey recently. They were looking to do a little lick of lime wash on it, and I found they used cement in the original restoration, and the job turned into a much bigger beast. I went to another contractor, so this one's on my sites. The first project I ever restored was New Elgin Doocot, and it was a beehive Doocot with the ringed rat runs that go all around it. It was fantastic. It really made me aware that this is the vocation for me, in that this community building that was kind of abused and dilapidated by the community, we restored it, and then it became a valuable asset for the community, and it's now well looked after. And I think that's testament to the other Doocots that have been restored. They found a future life, you know, a use, a purpose in the community, and that keeps the buildings alive because they've got a really beautiful story to tell. Glenbarr Doocot specifically is quite unique. It has the pigeon exit holes here. Same on the other side. It's quite difficult to tell because it is so over encroached with vegetation, and the wall heads, well, the roof's gone, you know, and the wall heads are exposed to the elements, so the earth's kind of attacking it from the ground and from above. But we can tell from those projecting, what are they, rat runs or are they rat sundecks? I don't know, you decide. There's evidence of them at the front and the back, so we think there's quite a few small flight holes, but we do know inside there's a lot of pigeons that would have resided in there at some point. Far aboots the Doocot, right? So I'm from the northeast, Scots dialect. I know we're southwest here, but yeah, far aboots the Doocot. No idea. It's in there. It's behind that tree, you know, or maybe is it behind that tree? I don't know. So, I mean, the first problem we've got really is it's obscured from sight. I mean, literally the road is as far away as you're standing, really. So we can't see it. We don't know it's there. It's forgotten. And it's a shame because, you know, it's a beautiful building. So the rhododendrons have become quite substantial, massively over encroached and hidden the Doocot. The facade, the front elevation of Glenbarr is quite stunning in itself. It's, you know, it's quite an old Doocot in itself, but the masonry is all very well squared and randomly coursed, and the joints are super, super tight, which is, you know, an example of fine craftsmanship. They've gone to a lot of time and effort to take, you know, the way that stones were constructed at that time, they were big boulders taken from the earth. There was no saws, mechanical equipment. They're split with plugs and feathers. You know, it takes ages to drill a hole and get that plugs and feathers to split the stone, and then it's all taken down by hand. But to formalize and dress the stone down to such a fine finish with really tight joints is, you know, it's a real exhibition of craftsmanship and skills. So, you know, that wants to be celebrated. But you can't really tell because it's so green from the organic growth, from the vegetation, from the over-encroachment of the rhododendrons and the trees that surround it. The reason it does get so green is that the rhododendrons and the trees, they cast a shadow. It's a very moist environment it's in, so, you know, it becomes part of the environment, it becomes part of nature in some ways. So we've got a little peek through the door. There's no door. It's completely open, so there's no security in any way, which, one, is quite good. It gives you clean and open access to investigate, peek in the past, the history, to see what's going on in these beautiful buildings. But the floor is really uneven from the fallen masonry, which has come from the wall heads, come from the gable ends. Now, as I say, the first job that I ever did restoring New Elgin Doocot, my first job was to dig the crap off the floor, which was quite stunning. So, you know, after all that rubble gets picked up, there's probably a really fertile bit of guana, which, you know, you could use for tanning some leathers, or but maybe I could put a bit on my head, like, try to get some hair back in there, I don't know. But yeah, there's there's a little bit of excavation to be done, not a huge amount to be fair, to get to a sound level base. And I think if this is open to the public in any way, you know, a good exercise in clearing that rubble away, you know, and this could be a community thing where it's led, you know, risk assessment method statement in place, and, you know, we'll get our hands dirty, we'll get gloves on and get gloves dirty, excavate that and create a nice level flooring that we're basically making it safe to access. So that's the first sort of level intervention. Here, I'm geeking out a little bit on there's a few new papers that have been released. My whole career, I have been looking at examples of archaeological evidence of building before I make the decision on what mixes I use and what methods we use to finish them. A lot of the traditional building repair that's been done over the last 100 years is all wrong. There's a rubble worship fashion which started off in Victorian times, with the Victorian stripped lime finishes off buildings to expose the stone, because we all love to see the colour and textures of stone, but it's got a detrimental effect to the health of the building unless it's been tooled and quarried and designed like this has, where the joints are super tight. Some of the early examples that Kirsten had shown, some of the buildings that had been restored, had been left with a bare stone. They didn't put the harling back on it. And that leaves the building really vulnerable. You know, rubble stone is a pretty poor quality field stone. It was never ever designed to be exposed. And when we're in an environment where there's much more rainfall, weather is much harsher, much like it is tonight, these buildings take an absolute battering. So, you know, if you're going to invest and look after your buildings, if it is a rubble finish, you want to protect them with lime. The facade, being the grand surface here, wasn't harled. It wasn't exposed stone. But you'll notice this flat card that I put on here, it's a bit blurry, it's focused in the background, not the back, but what that's trying to prove is how flat the pointing is. It's not recessed. A lot of modern masons, they recess the joint. The recess is a speed bump for water as it travels down the building. The construction joint is the most vulnerable part of the building construction, so if you invite water in with a recessed joint, you're asking for more water to come into your building. So it's, you know, a lot of people are spending a lot of what they feel is good money on restoring buildings, exposing the stone, a recessed joint, but they're actually doing more damage by taking out stuff like this and putting in recessed joints. Anyway, I've got a bee in my bonnet about that. Yeah. All right, I'll get off. So leading on to the side and the back walls, they were lime harled. So, you know, the facade is opulence, it's grand. But the side elevation, this is just rubble stone. This is just stone that's been cleared from a field. You know, it's been piled up and they've just built it how they've had it. What am I saying here? Before I jump onto that, it's quite unique. There's not a lot of ridgeline Doocots. When I say a ridgeline, so you would have had a gable at the front and back, and you would have had an apex with a ridgeline that goes along the top. So the roof would be splayed. So, you know, we could shout about that a little bit more. Could maybe up the classification maybe, but it's quite unusual. We've got some bad news, good news here. The raised ground at the perimeter makes walking around it a little bit uneven, but it also forces water to push further up the wall. Wherever the moisture is at that level, moisture wicks up from that level, so by removing the raised ground, it helps lower the wicking up of the moisture, which helps protect the building, which is good maintenance for any solid walled construction. The proximity of these really large mature trees poses some risks and dangers. I mean, we want to save the trees by all costs, but we do have to be realistic and consider their impact on the building, especially if we are investing in the long-term health of the building. So you've got really large, substantial branches. You know, they're looming over the building. They could come off. They could smash a roof off if we put a roof on it. You'd have to consider issues like that. You've also got root heave. So these trees are huge. The way that roots spread is not just down, but it's actually across quite a lot. I mean, we've seen so many trees be uprooted over the last couple of years with these high winds, right? So we really know how root networks work. But these are so close to the building, they are going under the building without a shadow of a doubt. Without going too deep into what you can do, There's this process called pollarding, maybe many of you in the room already know, where you just take some of the major limbs off the trees. The tree's saved, the roots take some pressure off, like the heavy roots, and it takes that stress or potential stress away from the building. Now, all the elevations are really good, apart from the one you can't see. There's a slight bulge. It's not major. You know, there's maybe a deflection of about an old money 3 inches. So it is starting to happen. You know, there is a bit of pressure coming from the ground that we know is there. But these elevations are true and straight and strong. And that's testament to the building construction materials. The stone's really hard. It's a local field rubble stone. They've used at the dressed elements, which is the facade, and the corners, the coins at the corner, a sandstone, which has been dressed, but it's a super hard sandstone. It's all been constructed. I've not done analysis on it yet. That's one of the next stages. But from experience, from knowledge of working with these materials and buildings over 3 decades, like I know it's probably like a really lime-rich mortar that they've used, slightly hydraulic, so it's strong, it's durable, and it would have been covered with a lime harl, which would have protected that rubble stone. But despite it losing its surface finish of harling and lime wash, you know, the main wall elevations, they're in really good nick. You can see some evidence of lime harl just there. It's a protected area. Yeah, the loose and dangerous masonry at the wall head. You can see the soft, rooted, shallow vegetation. It just sits there like a mat, like a wig on the building. You can see it unfurling down. So what we know that's happened there, what I know when I get up to that wall head, I know that the lime that is there being exposed to elements and with this rooted vegetation, soft rooted vegetation, that the lime's going to be replaced by soil now, and that will just continue to travel further down the longer we leave it exposed to the elements and not put any wall head protection on it. The next level of vegetative danger, can't quite see from this picture, unfortunately, but there's a substantial tree growing out of the top of it. And at the gable end there as well, and there's one starting just on the other side. I think we're at a critical point, a critical pathway where we don't do anything about that strong, woody, rooted tree that's growing out of it. You're looking at a much larger scope of works in terms of conserving or restoring this building. I didn't write a script, by the way, I just thought I'd blather. So, this is amazing. I'm also based down at Saddle Castle, been there the last 11 months, restoring that building. We found evidence of this there, Lysagan patterns. It was really unique, and it blew my little mind finding them at Saddle Castle, because some of the stones, which is kind of an igneous gneiss stone, really hard, really old. Like that stone had like Lysagan patterns in the stone, and right next to it, the lime, high calcium, lime-rich mortar had like an imitation. It was like, you know, like for like. It's bizarre, amazing. So, like this caught my eye years and years ago. I'm a keen mountain biker, climber, adventure, all that stuff. And I love ruins, so, you know, I'd be camping out in a ruin overnight. And you quite often see inside a protected wall of a ruin that was plastered on the hard, like so, internal lime plastering or external lime harling, as this would have been. How it's formed is there's a bit of a debate, but it's a calcitic action. I used to think it only happened in coastal environments, which blew my mind when I found it inland at Cairngorm Estates, you know, right in the high mountain range. So it couldn't get any further away from the coast if you tried. And again, here, this is not, well, a wee bit away from the coast. It's in the forest. But yeah, this is it's really interesting, visually beautiful. You know, it's a talking point in terms of promotion of the building. some interpretation, a better explanation that I'm doing now of how it happens, could be a good talking point, to bring interest into building. Absolutely. A good indicator is a high calcium lime-rich mortars formed by the precipitation of calcite during the carbonation process, now being exposed due to weathering cycles to the way that, do you know how lime mortar works? Starts off as limestone. Limestone basically is CBCs, is how I normally explain it to the kids. And there's kids in the room, I'll use that as a good excuse. Millions of years ago, when the world was just an ocean, millions of CBC shells settled to the ocean bed. Ocean bed's raised, you've got limestone, compression. That limestone we burn in a kiln about 1,000 degrees, very primitive. Just put it in kilns kind of look like beehive Doocots upside down. So you burn limestone in a kiln, it dries off carbon dioxide and produces a material called quicklime. Love to do you a demonstration on quicklime, it's super exciting. So quicklime in a bucket, you add water to it, and you get a really violent reaction. It's like 0 to 100 degrees, like that. Slightly dark version of it, but during the mad cow disease in the northeast of Scotland, where I've got lots of family roots, Ken, they didn't burn the cows, they put them in pits and covered them in quicklime. The quicklime aggressively seeped. It's called slaking when you add water to quicklime. But the quicklime aggressively sought the water out of the cows. Sorry, farmers. They shouldn't be bringing up bad stories. But anyway, it's a really violent reaction. So this lime stone that's been burned in a kiln, that becomes quicklime. You add water to it, it becomes lime putty. Add sand to it, it becomes a building material. And we build with it, we point with it, we plaster, we harrow with it, same stuff. We do some slight tweaks and additions to make it function in the environments that we're putting in. And then the magic is reabsorption of the carbon dioxide. So the carbon dioxide that was driven off during the burning process of the limestone right at the start after the quarrying is reabsorbed. So, it has to reabsorb carbon dioxide to produce and almost returns to being a limestone, although a slightly different one, but it's calcium carbonate to calcium carbonate. So how it's formed, there's gaps, there's spaces. So the rings that are left are the really strong calcium, and the spaces in between are the spaces in between that have been worn away by the weathering. I'm blethering now, right? Right. I love this. So there's many reasons how we know it was harrowed. There's lots of historical precedents that talk about full surface coverages of rubble, sandstone. But what I love about this, and this, there's no debate about this, this mortar has been applied with primitive tools and it hasn't been finished, like at the facade where we've seen the finished mortar. You could see the mason has put a surface finish on it and they'd striped it as a finish, but this isn't finished. It's applied, it's been brought to a fullness, and then they've harrowed straight on top of it. So this has never been designed to be exposed as a pointed finish. What the mason's doing is he's building the stones one on top of each other, and after they build, they slaster the mortar over the stone as it's been built. But you can see the tool marks on it. You can see the hand as it's been brought over. And they just keep on doing that, and then they cast the mortar for the harrowing on top of it. So, there's no question or doubt this was harrowed. There's even that could even be evidence of harrowing on a full flat face. These little spots and specks on a big full face of the stone. So, if this was a full restoration, this building's going to be harrowed. It has to be. It would be inappropriate to restore this building and not harrow the side and rear elevations of it. So again, this whole inside of the wall was harrowed. It was plastered on the hard. I mean, it's a house for the doos. It's a do house. So it wouldn't be like a fine plaster like we've got in our own house, but there is evidence all over it that tells us that had a surface finish on it. They looked after the pigeons in this house. But it's also on this bottom wall here. and on the opposing walls, we've got evidence of it in the next slide. So the lime plaster, the lime wash, it also has not antiseptic. It helps with bacteria. You know, the early records of Health and Safety in Factories Act, whatever, 18 whatever, they prescribed lime washing these agricultural and factory buildings to help with diseases. You know, so they looked after the pigeons here. We know it was plastered in the hard. We know it was lime washed. It would have been a clean space. It would have been inviting. You know, they wanted to bring some pigeons to the house. I suppose we've got a little bit of insight into, there's the tree growing out the wall head. So I mean, it's quite juvenile at the moment, but that's going to be really disruptive. Disruptive because what we can see up there, there's pretty much the same going on down there. So to get that guy out, you know, at first look, we can cut it off, and we can cap it, and we can stunt its growth. But we don't want to do that too fast, because if it shrinks, if that root shrinks, there's going to be a masonry collapse. So if that was to grow any more, there's going to be more disruption. There is going to be some disruption, probably about there. But it seems to be the only area where it's got that for now. So left untouched, there's going to be more of that. I've probably not stated too much in my chat so far, but the building's in like really good condition. It is a crossroads in time. Like the core is really strong. There's only a slight bulge in this wall. You know, the protective surface finish of the harling and the plaster is gone. There's evidence of it being there, which is good. But the fullness and flushness of the areas that were plastered and harled and rendered is really full. So it's like, it's in alignment. It could be saved without a huge investment. You know, we're looking at potentially making the wall head strong, potentially putting a roof on it, clearing out the inside and putting a door in it. You know, that simply, it could be made into like a comfortable habitat for future use. Again, that's the plaster on the hard. Okay, fine. That's a plaster on the hard at the bottom of the Doocot there as well. Sorry about that. Fit to do new. It's up to you, really. So there's 3 levels of intervention that can happen from this point in time. My recommendations, I might actually put it back to the picture because it's a pretty picture, that, isn't it? I really love. Can we put it back in a sec? Can you put it back? It's like, it's got a use. Yeah, I mean the community is using it, and that's amazing. And if we can find a space to give a bit of a respite from the wilds and weathers, I mean that's dynamite. That's gold, really. It's harsh out there. So you know, the very basics, like immediate work that we should be thinking about is this building safe for the kids to go in and using it? And I don't want to stop them, but there is like real risks involved that we've got to consider. And you know, it's the community's kids that are using it. So you know, having the community adults getting involved and doing something about that as well would be great. When I first seen it, I thought it was a bit Blair Witch. What's going on there? Like this soft mat, and maybe the doos have come back, but I find it's community, which is cute. It's really nice. Right, 3 options. Urgent. Want to be attended to immediately to ensure we are in control of the current conditions so that the decline is halted, putting the brakes on. The condition, the building is held until procedures can be put in place for a level of conservation restoration work to follow. What that looks like really is the ground levelling. It's really quite uneven. You know, it's a fairly easy task to get that levelled, but we've got loose stones at the top, and we've got trees growing out of it. You know, we really want to put the brakes on that. It's a difficult one as well. So we know what we're seeing. So we need to have our eyes open into the level of intervention they might have. So there's a couple of procedures that we use in conservation. Soft or hard capping. So if we remove the vegetation, we can simply put on like a limecrete capping, which is almost, it will just lock down. I mean, the stones are loose, you know, and they're at risk of falling, but without moving them at all, because it is listed, and to do any restoration, you have to fully record every stone, its exact position, involve an archaeologist, you know, and that's time and it's money and it's expense and it's process. Meanwhile, you know, it'd be good to use this building safely. So, you know, we could chop that tree, we could encourage the roots to die slowly, copper nails. We could get the soft vegetation off the wall heads and we could put a limecrete capping on it, and that just holds it, clear the floor out, and now it's safe. But, you know, at this point in time, like I kind of want to put fence pins around it and be like, dangerous building, you know, because, you know, there's a real risk. So next level is conservation. So conservation and restoration. Conservation is basically preserving it as a ruin the way it is. So, you know, it's very similar to the urgent response, but more involved with an archaeologist, more involved with a conservation masonry contractor like Limerich, who loves a Doocot. And that would basically be, it wouldn't be replacing the Harlan, it wouldn't be replacing the plastering. It would just be removing the tree root growth. It would be putting a proper wall head capping on it. It would be rebuilding the masonry. It would be providing a platform for restoration. So, you know, you could do this in 3 stages. And it's good money spent. It's not money wasted. You know, the urgent stuff, right, we can use it, continue using it as a community with peace of mind that we're not going to hurt the kids. Conservation would be the first step in the ocean of actually bringing this into tomorrow. You know, and the restoration, well, I mean, that's a big ticket item, really. You've seen the successful stories that Kirsten presented earlier. You know, we could put a roof in it, we could put a door in it, there could be interpretation, it could be a woodland den, it could be a camp out overnight, forest, you know, fit to do. You know, it's up to you. It's your house. It's your house new. So, yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. Oh, any questions?
What kind of time scales, if the urgent work was done and we started the conservation work, how long would it take? Literally, how long would it take to conserve it before we go to restoration? Or can you miss that bit out and go straight from urgent to restoration?
Absolutely. So the urgent, pretty straightforward. It's just gathering the masses, getting some muscle and some, organised chaos. I'm thinking, but no, I have a working party. You know, a working party where the community is involved, maybe some other charities involved, somebody to supply cake. We need cake for these jobs. I know somebody to look after it as well, you know, so, you know, I'm dealing with buildings all the time, method statement risk assessment, I have a plan in place, a procedure, there's listed building consent that you would need for further works, but to make it sound without doing any intervention would be a pretty straightforward process. So that can happen quite quick, and start to finish to make it safe. It could probably be done in a handful of weekends, or maybe a week. Or maybe a couple of weeks, solid start to finish, with some community involvement over a long weekend or a couple of long weekends. As a contractor, you know, we could come in and segregate it and get stuck in. But everything that we want to do for a community project, we really, really encourage the community to be involved. Like the likes of Sarrel Castle, it's very difficult, it's a very commercial project, but I hired local labourers. You know, and we did doors open days, we did scaffold walks, we did SPAB working parties. You know, we need to elevate, we need to educate, you know, I mean, the craft skills as well, and such a demise, getting people into this trade, which is bizarre, right? Because, like, look how much I enjoy it. You know what I mean? Why are people not wanting to get their hands dirty and, like, fix things? It's cool. So second stage conservation, a little bit more involved. You know, we've got plan applications, listed building consent, we've got archaeological briefs. That kind of project is going to be like, if 3 months would be keen, but 3 to 6 months, I would say realistically we could conserve it. So it would be like peak summertime, and again we'd have a working party, we'd have community events, we could have the kids only, we could have professionals for continual professional development. You know, they need to do their CPDs for conservation works and restoration. Something like this, it's going to take a year. You know, to get a roof on it. I mean, there wouldn't be drainage, there wouldn't be plumbing put on it. You know, because it's a deuce. But we'd have to consider the ground around it, because once we put a roof on it, there's going to be more aggressive rainwater dispersal. That's going to go at the ground. So I was talking earlier about the raised ground that's around the building. Under an archaeological watch, I'm hypothesizing here, but we could dig the ground perimeter yay by yay and pack it with compressed with stone, round cobbles. We use foam glass aggregate quite a lot. That might be a good idea for this. So it's just because the height of the moisture and back from the wall wicks it up. So if we layer that height down, right down, it keeps the bottom of the walls dry. So when it rains, the water goes deep down and away, feeds the roots of the trees. Don't upheave the building. Soak away, total soak away. So foam glass aggregate is really good because it's like glass bricks, irregular, but you whack them down. So you can actually whack them down and put grass on top. So visually, you've no idea, but it'll never ever get damp from the bottom floor. It's brilliant. 6 months to a year for a restoration project. I mean, 6 months, it could be done in 6 months if it's all planned and organised and in place. But it is just a wee thing. It's just logistics, and it's a wee bit awkward getting out.
What about the sort of, for the want of a better word, the paperwork? Like the applying for, do we have to have permissions to do all of this?
Yeah, it's listed.
Yeah. How long? How long's that bit of string in your pocket?
They're behind you.
Yeah.
What we need to do is, if the decision to do it, then we need to spend a lot of time up front getting organised and putting the bits together before we get there, and then it can go down. Of course, there's red tape. That behind the scenes.
But it's actually, it's quite exciting that it's not like 5 years or 6 years or maybe never, and the fact that you're thinking it's such a unique and in relatively good condition.
Really good condition.
We look at it and you think, oh shit.
Yeah, I mean, I think in another year, if we did nothing, that tree's going to become established. Otherwise, we'll take a big route. And you're going to, rather than just concentrating on rebuilding roughly 0.5 metre of all the wall heads all the way around. It's not a big area, but then there's the gable ends that need built up to their original height. So if we got down the road of doing that work, we'd be looking to do a geological study of the stone. So if we do have to bring new stone in, it would be the right stone. But, it's a vernacular building. It's built with the stone that's around this area. So any ancillary building in the neighbourhood that's gone to the ground, if the property owner is all right about that, we'll get some wheelbarrows and get it around there, and we can rebuild it with that. It's just for the facade where it's got the squared and random coursed sandstone. We need the BGS for that, but the rubble on the side elevations is under your feet. Aye.
As well, isn't there the likelihood that the quite bit of that stone is actually inside the building underneath all that?
Yeah, I mean...
You would discard that, you would take
No, reuse it. Absolutely, it's good stone. Yeah. There's not a huge amount of stone that's collapsed in. I think, it's in the wood. It's in the woods, kids, myself, I know kids are at this. Like when I was a kid, I grew up in Clon, and there's quite a lot of traditional buildings, Doocots, carriage houses. They were just dilapidated ruin. I used to play them as kids, but you pick up stones. You know what I mean? So there's not enough in the middle of the house for now.
Could you please explain where it's located exactly?
It's behind that bush. So if you, I know, it's really difficult to see. So if the entrance for the Abbey, if you're at the entrance to the Abbey, you'll just at the entrance look across the road, and there's you can see a dirt path. You can see a dirt path that takes you up slightly in the woods and across. It's just there. It's literally 5 minutes walk from the Abbey. Yeah.
Can more dates it to mid-18th century? Now that you've had a look and you're doing proper surveys and whatnot, is there any way that you could be a bit more specific?
It's fair enough.
Yeah, it's tied to the big house. It's tied to the big house. So yeah, we just have to dig deeper with the records.
It's tied to Barr House. And can I also ask you about the original roof? What would the materials have been on the original roof?
It would be likely to be local timber, which is pine, I would imagine, sarkin boards and slate. Yeah, so it'll be timber and slate. So again, there's some digging to be done, looking at the local buildings around the same age, looking to see what quarrying was done round about then. Yeah. Yeah, so there's no evidence in the building, unfortunately, that it is gone. We might find some, but the wood will be rotten. You know, it's well gone. We might find some slate from a bit of archaeological dig around the place. But yeah, we'd look to local buildings around about the same style, same time, same era. You know, 'cause like Kirsten had said, you know, these buildings, these small ancillary buildings are often, sometimes they replicate the big house in some ways, in styles and form, but they use the same materials, you know.
Well, the original part of the Abbey is very much that shape. The oldest part of it is that shape, which is quite interesting.
Yeah.
Because it was originally a charge house, not change house.
Right.
So the Jews would have been a source of food, you know, serving up pigeon pie to the travellers.
Yeah. That would, you know, through every step of the process, would be informed by the building. You know, you do the right research to the archives and records and local examples. But the building itself, you know, like my excitement of finding, you know, the tool mark, the mason applying the mortar. The building's got the answer, so we just got to get in about it.
And you've brought that excitement through.
Yeah. Thanks. How old do you think the building is?
Well, it's over 200 years. Yeah, mid-18s. Yeah. If you've enjoyed this and you've got an appetite for more, I'm on episode 2 of the Repair Shop on the Road, BBC iPlayer. I don't get any commission for it, but I'm chuffed as anything. So I'm BBC Repair Shop on the Road. It's on the iPlayer, episode 2.
Wow.
Check it out. Yeah. Limerich, by the way, phone me. Okay, well, if you'd like to thank Linda and Kirsten for the earlier presentations, that would be nice, because it's and hopefully we'll see you at the Digout.